Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the official first episode of Asymmetric Habits. So this is the first one that is actually going to be that is being recorded with intention is being released on the podcast circles as episode one. Where JP and I are excited to do that. Which, speaking of, my good friend and I, Jonathan Pishner, and the head of Apex Counseling, professional licensed counseling master himself, and myself. So, little peon, strength and conditioning coach, and enthusiast of mental development. We decided to basically put these things together because we're both just such nerds when it comes to all forms of self development. And today's topic is: are you wanting to keep adding blank to fix your problems? And if you are, we want you to try subtracting first. This is something that, and it's a very human behavior, although I'm very curious to see what JP has to say about kind of what causes it. I feel like it's not always been this way, but I'm curious to see what the academics have to say about it. But we all know either have experience or know people that do these types of things. We want to lose weight, we try to add supplements or maybe add more cardio to our workouts. If your things aren't going the way you want them to at work, we try to work longer and harder hours. We seem to be a very addition, do more focused like society. And so often the better answer would actually be to instead look at things we can get rid of. So you'll let my friend
Okay.
JP again talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, and I didn't bother to try and find like the absolute most up-to-date research on this, but I'll tell you what my suspicion is. It would say is that really this is much closer to being an American cultural phenomenon, and a few other like really work-centric companies like Japan, companies, good gracious, countries, for heaven's sake. Um, but one of the things you see in people who really get into a productivity mindset is they start adding things to a system to a point where their system becomes really unwieldy. Like, they have to have this amount of time at work, and then they have to have this amount of time working out. And even just like being stuck in traffic for a few minutes can destroy the system.
Hmm.
And it's if you want to live that way, it's not necessarily wrong. I don't really think it's my place to say that's wrong. But most people, when they want to make an improvement in their life, the very first thing they start to do, just like you said, is they want to add something. And that has only been exacerbated by like a lot of the, I usually call it, and I saw it called online, productivity porn. Like you follow all these motivational and productivity accounts, and a lot of them tell you all kinds of things to add. Very few of them talk about subtracting anything. And in my work, one of the things that I notice is at some point I started to notice that I was really encouraging people to subtract things first because I mean stuff will get added anyway. It's not like you can literally do nothing in a block of time. But when you think of what can I eliminate first, figuring out what to add back is almost a whole different procedure. Um, so one of the things I'll go to immediately because I think it's going to be blindingly obvious is one of the things that I often ask people if they want to be better at work. How do I get more done at work? A lot of times I'll ask them, how much do you sleep? 4 to 5 hours, maybe. Well, okay, what would happen if you subtracted 2 hours off of work and slept more? Would that up your productivity? People are very resistant to that concept, which is exactly why we ended up doing an episode about it. But usually people, when you say, "Hey, what about it? What if you just subtracted things?" There's almost this visceral reaction of fear
Fear.
about doing that. That's why I wanted to do a podcast on
Yeah, like it is terrifying when you, especially because if you're in these situations again, you're trying to get something done, you're trying to achieve something, whether it's for yourself inside your fitness or outside with the business or something like that. And if you do that, I mean, so many of us are like think that at that point everything we're doing is already trying to get us there. So how can we feasibly do less and have it work better? It is, yeah, it is such a, it's funny. It's counterintuitive until you actually learn how it works and
Mhm.
you experience it. And then and then it makes sense. Like once you kind of learn how this works. Um, like the way I pretty much see it is that when it comes to what's happening functionally is when we actually make these changes of subtracting, we're learning to focus more on the things that actually do move the needle and actually do make the biggest difference, getting rid of a lot of the extras, which are typically just extra work, extra stress, or even just extra time, and letting us focus more on those things that matter most. And then, like you mentioned, if we can also do that in the case of having it improve our recovery, either through actual sleep time because we're just trying to stay awake and do too much and get better quality of that, we improve, thus our functionality improves. Or it just gets better because we have less things to focus on, so we're able to give more attention to what actually needs to be done like the most, and that improves. And there's really a positive feedback cycle. I think once you actually start seeing the difference, it's just really hard and scary to get somebody to step into that cycle and give it an honest shot.
Well, and not only that, it's actually, I think, scary every time you have to ask the question. And I kind of blamed our culture for that. You know, as I've said a number of times in these talks, America was really heavily founded on the Puritanistic work culture, and we've never really moved away from that. And so most people, by the time you propose, like, hey, what if doing less would actually help? Some of them are like 25, 30, 45 years old, and they've spent decades perfecting their ability to work more. You know, it's kind of a funny way to say it, but in a way, it's almost against their religion to like to work less, or to do less of anything. Um, you know, I'll feel it in the gym all the time. My very first instinct, if I want to like really accelerate my strength gains, is work out more.
Yep.
And happily, I know you and I know Nick, and I have people whispering in my ear who are very wise in the area of working out. And I know to ask myself the question, wait, would I accelerate more by taking like an extra rest day? But if I subtracted working out, would that actually accelerate my process? If I subtracted a workout and added back in recovery instead of like just more working out, would that accelerate my process? So
Mm.
happily I know to do that. But every single time there's like back here in the unconscious parts of my brain, I feel like that voice being like, no, you can't do that. You're gonna lose progress, and you're gonna, and whatever other nonsense stories it
Yeah.
comes up
Mhm.
with.
It really does feel, it can feel personal. I think too that's part of like when you were mentioning that about on like almost comparing it to someone's like personal religion involving work. Funny because I was going to bring up the Puritan thing if you didn't. It's like, um, but yeah, like especially in that case, if you're someone who's been in that lifestyle for a while, you have gotten better, quote unquote, at managing higher workloads. Like it's what you do, and like you said, if someone else mentions that, especially if it's someone that we think hasn't worked as hard or worked as long, something like that, it can seem like yeah, it can seem like a personal insult that that person who has not quote unquote done what you have could possibly say that like that's not the right way to do it, or what do they know? They haven't done it,
Mhm.
young whippersnappers, all that good stuff. We know it doesn't have to be that. But it's just like you said, yeah, like it's some in a lot of these places, like you mentioned, like I mean, America or just a lot of the like Japan, other situations, but doesn't even have to be that global. Is at some point in most of these situations, there was a very positive return on working harder, working longer, whether it was strictly because of that or just, the right place at the right time. Who knows? A mixture of those things. There was that. So it could have been through success, like being a hard worker at times of booms. Or it could have even just been you got to survive. It could have been the opposite. Like time sucked, but they got the people who could really dig down and just keep their head down and like really work could survive better than others.
Mhm.
And those lessons that becomes that person's reality. they pass that on as their lessons and expectations. And when things change and times change, though it's not that their lessons are no longer true and valid, but yeah, like it's no longer necessarily like as necessary or as clutch as those things. Like other variables always come into play. You said like
Well,
they ignore the
yeah,
thing.
and let me follow that for a second, because one of the things that happens is people will get into the mindset of add more, add more, add more, because sometimes the goal shifts and they don't realize that the goal shifted. I mean, let's take the most basic work you can possibly do. If you spend 6 hours digging a ditch or 12 hours digging a ditch, I mean, there's almost no circumstance where you won't have a longer ditch at the end of 12 hours, even if you're more exhausted.
Mhm.
There's not a lot of productivity optimization that can happen. What a lot of people do is the goal will shift, uh, and they'll not notice it. So, like, what ends up happening, and if we keep it on an easy example, like just basically exercise. As people age, the goal has to shift a little bit just to keep up with an aging body. But also internally, the goals will shift a little bit. Like, here's a good example. Um, a person starts working out 2 days a week. And to get where they want to get, maybe that's not quite enough, so they add three. And just like you were saying, it worked, right? We add another one, so we're up to three, and that works. And then we add another one, we're up to four, and that kind of sort of works, but maybe we're hitting diminishing returns. And then we get to five, and maybe it's adding a little bit, but internally there's a shift that most people won't notice to a different goal. It's no longer about making the best like gains or optimizing. It starts to become internally about proving you can work out the hardest.
Mhm. Oh yeah.
And sadly, like that goal shift becomes almost like it happens under the surface, and most people wouldn't even notice it happen. Half the time, you got to talk to somebody like me to even realize like that help us have you dig it out that happened. But I talk to a lot of people because as soon as I say, what if you subtract, what if you took something away to see if this would work better? Uh, you really get to see the mindset come out of how people really believe that there's like a trophy for doing it the hardest way possible. And sadly, that's the goal people shift into, is like somehow I've cheated if I do it and I get good results, but I also am not like working as absolutely hard as possible, and in a way making it miserable. Sadly, that goal gets stuck in there without people even noticing it happen.
I am man, you like spoke to my soul, honestly. When you're saying like the award or medal for doing things the hardest thing possible. 'Cause there are so many things that I purposely choose to do a certain way because it's harder. Although like in my personal defense, I will say I still do that, but I choose it for things that I know will not actually like bother me or hurt me.
And it's okay if you know you're doing it. It's when you don't know you're doing it that it's horribly destructive.
Right, right. It's like, for example, like actually, yeah, like example here for the listeners. So you take if you take an ice bath, not so much for even the physical benefits, but because you want to expose yourself to something kind of miserable and not comfortable, because you have decided that that is something that's going to like make you better at dealing with things or just whatever. That's great. That's awesome. Do you? I do that all like I love that. But if you're like you're saying, if it's actually something where you're already trying to do 33 different exercises in a workout, um, don't add seven more because it's going to make the workout even harder, because chances are like that's not going to give you what you're looking for. Like
Mhm.
so there's differences here. Because really it's like we're such a more is better society. But here's the thing, it's only the right amount of more is better. It's like, like the baking analogy. when a cake says oven at 400 degrees for say 30 minutes, we don't put it in at 800 degrees for 50 so we can cook it in 15. It has to be that proper amount of temperature and length of time together that creates the result. We can't add more, and like I said, like that analogy actually fits a lot of things. There's a correct amount of more. If you're already there or even past it, you don't want to keep adding to it. Yeah, like calorie restriction. Like you need to restrict your calories more if you have not restricted them at all and you want to lose weight. That is likely going to be a necessary step to lose weight if that's one of your goals, is a little bit of calorie restriction. But if you've already restricted your calories by a healthy amount, the right amount, and you try to restrict them even more, which is what most people try to do in that case, you end up not seeing progress or slowing it down. Or maybe you see progress, but as soon as that's when you get stuck in that yo-yo, as soon as you go back to normal, you lose it all and then some, because you just you restricted your calories too much. There's a right amount, and that's ideally what you need to focus on.
Yeah. So if we're going to talk about subtracting things, let's make this usable to as wide an audience as possible, because really there's two questions that go along with that. It's what things would I look to subtract before I try and add, and what do I replace it with? Because like we said, you don't create a vacuum. The time automatically gets filled, even if it gets filled with nothing but Netflix. It gets filled with something.
Mm.
But one of the things that I usually encourage people to really look at is whenever it's thinking about subtracting, is what's the goal first off? What are you trying to accomplish? And then what are the areas of that consume the most energy? Matter of fact, we're strongly examining a potential subtraction right now. There's an insurance company that we work with that it takes an inordinate amount of my time, attention, and energy for the number of clients we have with that insurance and the amount of money they pay us. They are at serious risk of getting subtracted because I'm pouring a ton of effort into them for some reasonably small returns.
Mhm.
Uh, and that's exactly the method I used to determine that. I was like, okay, what is consuming too much of my energy where I want to make my business stuff smoother? And they came right to the top of the list. Oh, you're consuming an awful lot of energy. So we're thinking through hard about subtracting that. But that can apply to anything. Matter of fact, cold therapy for me. In the winter, I cannot do ice baths. It is a level of misery I am not prepared to tolerate. I can actually do them in the summer, or I could do them certain ways in the winter, but just like jumping in the cold plunge, it actually expends too much energy mentally for just even the buildup. But in the summer, it's fine. So like I'll add it back in the summer, and then fall hits, and it'll go away, and it'll get subtracted again, and it'll get replaced with other stuff. But really, I encourage people to think about it in terms of energy consumption. What are you trying to
Yes.
accomplish, and what in that takes up too much energy?
Yeah. Man, I love that so much. Because it's man, it's like because like I'm energy is probably what I've struggled with the most personally in the last 10 years. And I mean, just from working to start my own business, I did the 100-hour work weeks, just all that super fun stuff you go through in those situations. Normal life happenings, etc. But just as a result, my energy fluctuates a lot, and I have been constantly trying to learn how to predict it, how to manage it, how to optimize it. Like I really, I'm always like most of my changes like that are actually based on that. How can I improve my schedule? How can I
Mhm.
like what can I do? How can I even change my meal patterns or my eating patterns? Like those types of things to try to make myself have more energy. And it's funny because I wasn't even thinking about that going into this talk, but I have in the last 2 years I wish I had an actual like statistic. Well, you know me for that, but I wish I had something I could actually say like black and white for how many things I have subtracted as opposed to added. And really, like that was the whole last part of last year, like the last 3 months, subtraction was my number one priority. I was just ditching things. I went into this year wanting to get rid of as many things that I thought were just like you said, like barely providing neutral returns, whether
Mhm.
it was with my own energy or financially, like with the business. Like, yeah, it was just what is not providing a good return and just trying to get rid of it so I just have less things that I could focus on going really well.
Yeah.
It is provide like paid off amazing dividends already, both personally and for the business ones in that. Can see the difference there too.
Mhm. And let me, I want to ask you a question about that here in a second, but let me give the what I usually encourage people to think about replacing it with, because I want to see if that's what you ended up replacing it with that gave you the good returns. Because usually what I tell people is when it's subtraction time, like okay, you've identified your goal, you figure out what needs to be taken away, but there's no vacuum. You'll add something in. It's not 100% of the time, but a solid 2/3 of the time, I find that most people need to add back in one of three things: stillness, slowness, or sleep. So, like, let's say we're talking about, oh, I want to be more productive at work. Okay, cool. What's being subtracted? Oh, well, I see that I work 14-hour days, and maybe I need to really try and scale that back to 11-hour days. One of the things that I'll say, okay, well, now we have 3 hours. Probably some of that will need to be devoted to stillness, slowness, or sleep. Probably you'll get a solid 2 hours of sleep. But I'll start asking questions like, well, cool, what if we use one of those hours and you take a long, slow lunch break instead of like doing a sprint working lunch, like a lot of people in that scenario might do? What would happen if you just like, ate lunch and took a nap? What would happen if like you kind of had a designated time to just leave work and take a walk? That's slowness instead of sleep. What if you took some of that and stretched or meditated or something? Would that produce a result? And what I find is that at least 2/3 of the time, when people take the subtraction time and then add in either stillness, slowness, or sleep, it usually is a good way to spend that new time. Not always. That's not a perfect formula, but it's certainly one that works a reasonable amount. And so I'm curious. You've done some subtractions, and I'm curious, like how often it has been replaced by stillness, slowness, or sleep to good benefit.
All of them. Yeah, as you said, as you were listing them, I was like, "Yep, yep, yep." It's like the slowness, the stillness, and the sleep. Yeah, all 3 of them for sure. Because I like to work. Like, it is like, I do enjoy doing it. I'm one of those people who can very easily fall into super long periods of work because I like it in the moment, and I like what I'm working to and what we're building, like, at the gym with the business. Um but nevertheless, Mike, it was just finally becoming too much. I was getting exhausted, like I mentioned there. And the other piece is, yeah, like the actual quality of my work was definitely at times not as high as I wanted it to be because I was either too spread thin, too distracted, too many things going on, too tired. And the quality and the exhaustion were the 2 things that for me, those were the top 2 that made me focus on, like, I wanted to focus the most on improving. Was I
Mhm.
wanna make sure that, like, everything I'm always functioning at a higher level. I don't wanna ever drop below, certain standards, and at the same time, I just wanna also really finally do better at taking care of myself that way and having more energy. So for me, it's been, yeah, like less overall total work hours, although I really track them, but I'm way more not even like okay is not even a strong enough word. I'm way more accepting and even you're always good at finding that word. Like I'm way more accepting of taking personal time and like and or immediately stopping for family time if the chance comes up, things like that,
Mhm.
where those would always normally have been like, whether for me or for a family someone else, would have been very easy to be like, okay, when I'm done with this or later or I can't now. So that's one immediate one. um
Yeah.
Doing so, like getting back into a better like workout routine for myself, which is a form of stillness in that sense. It's that mental stillness when we get to do that. Like it's refreshing that way. So that's helping in multiple ways. Gets me, my energy's returning. I'm getting more fitness, hopefully healthier. All those things it provides with stillness, and then like sleep. I wish I had the routine. It doesn't quite do that, but just still definitely getting more of that because I used to work late into the night a lot of times. And ironically, how I did last night, like we were talking before the call, um, I like that's not. I specifically choose to not do that anymore. Outside of moments of like I have to like that. So yeah, so in all three ways, like making that choice, and in all three ways, it's paid off.
Yeah, yeah, and paid off, a probably a surprising amount, 'cause I'll tell you the one that I've really worked on doing, is 2 things. Well, a thing and a half, 'cause, like, I find that if I have this story I tell myself, and it sounds so beautiful, and I love it. It's like, "Oh, man, you know, well, I have a free spot here so I can get this extra work done." And finally, 7 years later, I realize it's a nonsense story because it just never works out that way. Uh, because one of the patterns for me is, I do all my paperwork before I start seeing clients for the day. Once I start seeing clients, that is it. That is the only work that's going to get done that day, even if I have
Yep.
a 2 or 3 hour block in between them because of cancellations or something. And so finally, I did the thing that I'm encouraged people to do. I'm like, okay, this is not working. Can I subtract something? And so what I'm subtracting is the effort at, like, oh, I have this 3 hour block. Let me catch up on this thing. And instead, I add back in usually at least some sleep, which is, I usually do 25 to 45-minute naps. Some stillness. I'll sometimes go for a walk, depending on the weather, or I'll go down to the movement room and do a Tai Chi set. Um, but like, I finally started taking my own advice on subtraction because, like, here's the pattern that just won't work. This is untenable. It never works. Uh, so now the larger subtraction is I have my little to-do list. It's sitting right here next to me. There's no clients today, so today it doesn't apply. But on a day when I see clients, nothing is allowed to be on the to-do list after that. I'm allowed to write down the things I need for my notes, and then I have to leave.
um,
And just that subtraction has made such a massive difference in my ability to be productive, even though it sounds like I'm subtracting an hour of work here, 3 hours of work here, but my energy level now when I come to the office is so much more optimized that it pays off way more than you would ever think.
Mm. I want to point out one of the things you said there that's really good, I think, for people that and you kind of mentioned before, but and we talked, and it's been the subject of I don't know how many of these recordings actually, but is part of that started, or a big part of that was that introspection of like, okay, of the things I'm doing, which one do I want to focus on the most, or what is happening? Like, what are the actual results? Like you said, once you start seeing clients, nothing else is getting done. And
Right,
so
and what's taking up the most energy? Because I realized, like, oh, I'm really dragging myself to that desk to do that paperwork after I start seeing my people.
exactly. So yeah, so that actually brings up almost another variation or another choice that people can have with this, and that's identifying just like better functional pairs of what you do. And like I said, like whether it is with work, etc., like you might do, like there are things you may already do or want to do that may be fine, but you're just like, would be better attached to something else. It's like what this is like finding some of those habits, maybe like if it's grocery shopping, like are you already over on that side of town at a certain time period? Can you do it then? So it's what a more seamless transition and action rather than having to go to the store at a completely separate time.
The reason I'm smiling is because, like, as soon as you say that, I already know my optimized time for grocery store running.
So yeah, like man, there are like two things that will get me to go to the grocery store just to go to the grocery store. Otherwise, I'm probably driving past it already. It's like coffee and cat food, the two things, and toilet paper. But other than that, that's basically it. Like if other than that, I need to be driving past it. I mean,
So,
yeah,
so
like
really, it's coffee and coffee. For those who don't know, his cat's name is Coffee.
yes, exactly. Yep, yep. Um, yeah, so like learning more. So that's one of those things is like this is constantly about learning about how you respond to things. And again, not trying to make things perfect right off the bat, but just the more, little observations you make, especially when you can start making those observations on patterns and, like cyclical things, you can actually start kind of predicting a little bit. Then you can start really making some of these small changes and probably seeing bigger results. Because at that point, a lot of times all it takes is these little tweaks. Yeah, you subtract that one little thing here, and all of a sudden, so much weight is lifted off your shoulders. Or
Mhm.
yeah, like your brain fog is so much better. Like it's gone. Like little tweaks make these bigger changes. And I mean, let's be honest, that's what we're talking about with asymmetric habits, is these small changes with the much bigger outcomes. And
Yeah.
it comes from observation of yourself more than anything else.
Yeah, well, and so let me make note of two really important points to make this usable for a few extra people, because one of the things that you'll run into sometimes. So some people have accidentally painted themselves into a corner with their habits. That they have their job, and they have their kids, and they have their spouse, and they have whatever else is in their life, and the way things fit together uh, is really not well fit together, and it can look impossible to subtract something. Most of the time, if you're under so much stress and you look at your life and you're like, wow, there's literally nothing I can subtract in service of trying to make a change, you usually need outside eyes. And that may involve like a counselor, but it may involve just like a friend, like, just somebody who's not in the situation, who can kind of like, suggest something. Because once you get under a certain amount of stress, absolutely everything can look like it is a dire, horrible necessity. Uh, and an outside voice can sometimes point out, like, hey, hold up. You're also taking these college classes. You don't have to graduate at a specific time. What if you just took a semester or two off to, like, get some things under control? Because you can always go back. Because I promise you, universities will always take your tuition money. Uh, but sometimes you need somebody outside of you to say that, because you're so wrapped up in everything that it doesn't even occur to you necessarily that that's an option. So that's one thing to know. Sometimes if you look at your life and you're like, I can subtract nothing, even if you don't get professional outside eyes, just get some outside eyes from friends, family, or actually get professional outside eyes and see a counselor or something. And the second one is, I want to give people permission to at least think about this, because happily you don't always have to do this, but sometimes you'll notice that the thing that sucks up the energy is a person.
Yep.
And it is an unlovely conversation to have. But every once in a while, that there ends up being a person in your life that needs subtracted. Uh, sometimes that's a spouse and it's done through divorce. Sometimes it's a friend. Sometimes it's a coworker and you can just quit and find a job that doesn't have toxic coworkers. Sometimes that's an option. But unlovely though it is, don't forget that sometimes the subtraction might be something that is much harder to give up, because it's not that hard to, you know knock off an hour of Netflix and add an hour of sleep. That's a pretty easy sell. Uh, oh, hey, your best friend who used to be great for you and is now actually like toxic and sucking up all of your energy. That's a hard conversation to have, and certainly don't enter into that subtraction lightly. But do notice that sometimes it's not just like a little habit that needs subtracted. It's something much larger, like a person or a job or even the city you live in. Sometimes just you're in the wrong environment, and that's the subtraction. Uh, so notice those, in case it's a bigger one, because but that needs thought through a lot harder than we're thinking through our stuff today, for sure.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So here's a little list that I put together of basically like short ways to think of like, okay, if I actually take Jonathan and Jerry's advice and decide to try to subtract things, what might happen or what could come across. So if it's for yourself and you said you try to just subtract some of the things you're trying to do, like Jonathan said earlier, you get back the chances to have either some slowness, some stillness, or more sleep. If we're looking at relationships, then you get opportunities back for quality time. It's up to you whether you used them or not. And it might be one of the things mentioned before, like it might be sitting on the couch with your significant other or your kids watching Netflix. Like, that counts. Um, if it's a business where it can, like I know from firsthand experience, it can be like you said, like almost fearful to think of getting rid of things. Um, but it gives you a chance to do more of what is already working really well. And I think if you look around, you notice when businesses suddenly, like especially bigger businesses say, like, they get rid of an offering, like, that they've had, there is a very well thought out reason they're doing that. They realize that they would be better worth focusing on what their key revenues are at. But small businesses, same thing, especially because, small business owners, we intuitively want to like try to get everything done. Um,
Mhm.
if we're talking fitness, it takes proper recovery, both physical time off and fuel to grow, or just make changes. Like I don't mean necessarily even grow, but to improve and make those changes, whether it's burning fat, like getting in better just general fitness shape, gaining muscle. We were still talking about that. Um, it takes freshness to have performance. Like we can't perform at our best, especially physically, but mentally for sure, if we're not fresh. Like you cannot run your fastest if you're not fresh. You cannot throw the hardest if you're not fresh. Things like that. You can't even do moves as skillfully well as you practiced before if you're not fresh. And then with time is that when you remove things like focus, you get more, like less to do gives you like less things you need to focus on, which gives you a chance to again just what you want, really what matters the most can get more of your attention. Again, it's just like a little like a cheat list of like how all these things can come together in different situations and really actually improve things.
Yeah, man, that's a terrific summary.
I appreciate that. It's like, but yeah, like just like I said, thinking about it, like it's just from so much firsthand personal experience, but then when we see these things happen so often,
Mhm.
like there's just a lot to go on here. And like we talk about all the time, don't expect it to be perfect at the beginning. Like this is it's all a lifelong quest. Just keep remembering that this is something you can do, and almost treat it like spring cleaning. Every once in a while, if you think about it, you're like, man, like, okay, maybe you need to shake it out and do it big. It's like, um, hey, you got anything else, brother?
No, no, because where you delivered the summary, I think you captured all of that nicely.
Thank you. Well, again, everybody, we hope this helps. Thanks for listening. If like, leave a comment sometime if you hear this later, and you have a question or just want something to say. Share it with anybody you think will get something out of it. And like I mentioned at the very beginning, this is like if all goes according to plan, or even if not, but it just doesn't get blown up. This is going to be a podcast within the next week or two. Actually, found there on Spotify and the different podcast channels, I'm sure. This will be that official episode number 1. So thanks for tuning in. And we'll also be dropping in a lot of our older broadcasts for people to be able to like look into, see things that we've talked about before that may be beneficial for them. So thank you guys so much.
Took us nearly 2 years to get to episode 1. Well done.
Yeah. Woohoo! All right. See, we didn't give up. All right. So, all right, everybody. Have a great one. Catch you guys later.